The God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer title came from two different places. One was that I was a medic in the Army, during which time, for whatever reason, I decided to like enter into reading as an adult person. Well, I was 19 when I started really like hardcore reading, which I hadn't done as a child. And a lot of it was Vonnegut, in part because I think someone I knew and trusted, maybe another medic or something, was reading Slaughterhouse-Five and was like, hey, you should read this person. And I'm one of those people that what I do is when someone's like, oh, you should read this person, I'll look for every book that the person wrote and read them all like that. And so, of course, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. In Vonnegut's kind of like telltale, irreverent, sardonic, kind of sarcastic-y mode of thinking about these things. And then in the military, there's these muffins, are one of the few things that you get for free, just like by the caseload of Otis Spunkmeyer muffins that, well, okay, I would say not just in the military, but in the hospital, in the military, and in prison, which are the three kind of main locations in the novel. They were just everywhere. And I remember some days eating primarily or only Otis Spunkmeyer muffins, and people would fight over which flavor we had enough of, like full-blown temper tantrums about having some or not having one or whatever. And the attention and the emotional investment in them was so intense that it was hard not to think about or write about them. And this is also true when I would talk to people, friends and family who were coming home from prison being like, I remember those muffins. Or also later working in the hospital and being like, oh, they have a bunch of those muffins here too. So it was kind of one of those everywhere moments. And as a metaphor, it, let me open up the novel into thinking about things like health more concretely, what one eats, is allowed to eat, is expected to eat, is blamed for eating with regards to health outcomes, and everything that kind of comes from that as well. Yeah, I mean, so the protagonist is, what I would call a version or a facsimile of me, right? A person who is both working in healthcare and in the kind of realm of knowledge production and writing, right? So is getting a MD, PhD, actually, though, at the University of Pennsylvania and working as a tech, but was also in the Army for a while. And he has a whole host of intimate and non-intimate relationships with a broad cast of characters. Some of the closest friends are a coworker named Lise, who the protagonist did have a sexual relationship with before and doesn't now. Another character, the third character, who was a close friend who deployed with the protagonist. They were roommates while in Baghdad. And then a bunch of other coworkers and family members who come through the hospital are places where the protagonist is like working through intimacy in these different ways and trying to figure out where that intimacy or where the possibility of intimacy meets all of this other kind of fancy, I know lots of things because I've read lots of books, kind of relationships, and how that often fails. The video game thing and music and stuff came up, right? So like, the carrying on of music for such a long time, the way that music is so big in kind of African American life has to do with the fact that it could be carried for such a long time and then had a holding place in the church, right? After, even as like our systems of flourishing were being kind of obliterated throughout this country, it was still possible to maintain a kind of relationship to music in that way in particular. And I think, interestingly, with video games, what's also true is that things are generally fucked up. It's not safe outside. The parks are being bulldozed. You're not allowed to play in the hallways of the fucking apartments or whatever, all this like infuriating anti-child, anti-pleasure, anti-fun stuff happening, leaving the cops to the side for 1 minute, like, let alone, I could sit in the house and play video games. That is true that's a thing that I could do, right? And not be like, as they say, bothering anybody. I think the thing that's hard about writing about or trying to describe Black life in some ways is twofold. It's like half the time that everyone is going to say that all you're doing is reiterating stereotypes. And a lot of the times those folks will be well-educated, kind of intellectuals who come from like a storied family. People are writers, thinkers, teachers, activists, etc. I don't come from that kind of family, and I think that most, but it's true that most writers do come from a kind of family where someone was an artist, or someone had a kind of understanding, or someone was like a deacon in the church, or had some kind of role like that. I'm so interested in the everyday. I mean, I'm almost only interested in the everyday. There's moments, for example, in the novel, of events that happened. For example, when the Amtrak train derailed. I was at work that day in real life, and that's an event that happens in the book, but it's not a big drawn out thing. And for example, 9/11 happens in the memoir, but it's more about the interpersonal relations between who has power for that subject. And to their, to their minds, my grandfather in that sense, he's like, I don't fucking care. Like, why did they let you out of school? Is the thing that happens in that regard, right? So I am really interested in the quotidian in that way, in the everyday, because I think that it like helps us better describe how we relate to people and how we relate to each other. And that the kind of, there's a lot written about the political realm proper that leaves out what people are doing in everyday context, that I really want to kind of like shovel back into broader discourse, I think.